Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I'm Jessica Roberts, Senior Director of Business Development and Philanthropy with NCEA, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will monitor the questions and try to answer them in the allotted time. At the end of the session, I'll share an online survey link for you and instructions on how to receive a certificate of completion for the webinar. Today's webinar, Supporting New Principals, is brought to you by Strategic Measurement and Evaluation. Our speaker today is Dr. Dennis Jarvin. Today's webinar will introduce a model for profiling principal candidates across a range of critical job dimensions and discuss how to use that profile to create an individualized support plan for a new principal. Thank you for joining us today. And before I turn it over to our speaker, let us go ahead and begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, we are grateful for our teachers and friends who help us every day. Bless them with patience and wisdom, and help us to show them respect and appreciation. Let us be a light to others. In Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dennis. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. And we'll see if this, hold on. And are you seeing the screen or not?
No, not at this moment.
Okay, well, we tried this right beforehand, so. And
There.
all right, well, thank you, everybody, for attending this afternoon. The topic is, of course, supporting new Catholic school principals, and I am Dennis Jarvin. Here's the big idea for this webinar. So this gives people a chance to say, hey, am I in the right place or not? New principals are faced with a wide range of tasks and challenges. They've got to do a lot in a very little, period of time when they're a new principal. You've got to develop an understanding of the school culture, build relationships with students and parents, board members, master a series of complex tasks, administrative tasks, all this while having a day job at the same time. So how does an organization with a new principal identify areas where they can provide support that would have the most impact? And that's kind of the topic for today. How do we understand job dimensions to support a new hire? Okay, here's an overview of what we're going to be doing. I'm going to go introduce myself. I'll talk about what the idea of support means for this particular webinar. Talk about the principal in context, meaning what skills and relationships make up that job, and then use that job analysis to identify opportunities for support. And I'm going to provide as a handout too, as a sample, a survey form that can be used to accomplish what we're going to talk about in terms of identifying where support would best be directed. So again, I'm Dennis Jarvin. My PhD is in measurement and evaluation, and I am the president and owner of Strategic Measurement and Evaluation. We have been in business. Why should you listen to me? Who are we and what do we do? Well, we've been in business about 20 years. And in that time, we do three main things. We create educational assessments, we score educational assessments, and we do evaluation projects with schools and school districts. And it's that last part, that evaluation project, where we generate data to help schools make decisions about policies. And I enjoy that part almost as much as making tests, which, doesn't seem exciting, but it really is. I'm joined today by Jessica Roberts. She's our moderator. Thank you. And if you guys would take a moment and just type in the chat or in the Q&A what your position is in your school and why you decided to sign up for today's webinar. And Jessica's going to look at those answers, and she's going to I can kind of fine tune or adjust my presentation if she gives me information about who's actually in the audience, so I can try and make it more aligned with what your interest might be. And as those come in, I'll give a minute for that. Uh, I'll go on to the next slide and I'll tell a story. Sometimes I tell stories. What do we mean by support for a new principal? Especially a Catholic school principal. And I'm going to come at this from the perspective of industrial organizational psychology. Why am I using that perspective? Because that's part of my training. Back in time, I worked for a company that did job profiling and for both hiring and for supporting staff after they were hired. And that process begins with really, you define a job by identifying the tasks and relevant skills that are part of that job. Then you build a profile, measurement tools that can help, hey, which tasks and which skills are important for this job and for that individual who either going to be a new hire or who has been hired and needs to be developed as a team member. And how do we direct resources to those training opportunities? So it all begins with, again, defining the job, understanding what tasks and skills go into that job, building a profile, and then using that profile to direct resources for support. So it's very data-driven, very concrete, a way of thinking about support. So the first question is when you go in to do, what do principals do? I've one of my first jobs was profiling loom operators in textile mills across America. And, there is no academic study or job ad really for those, but it was really, hey, let's find people who do the job well. Let's look at what their skill set is, both in temperament and in what their actual job skills are. And let's build a profile around that job, what we learned from those studies. So we would conduct short academic studies in a way to identify what the job tasks were. We'd also look at the job ads to try and understand who does what where. Um, Now, for a Catholic school principal, there's a lot of overlap between what a Catholic school principal does and what a public school principal does. And most academic studies are focused on public school principals. But there really is a difference with a Catholic school principal. There's a huge difference in mission and having a calling almost. That's not necessarily the same with a public school principal. So what I did is I took a look at the job skills that academic studies say go with principals, but I also took a look at the job ads associated with real Catholic school job ads for principals. And there's one, now I blocked out the school name, and this was a principal job description. This is straight from, they actually had to sign this when they went in for the interview so that they understood what their job was that they were signing up for. So I took a look at these job ads as a way to understand, okay, what are the job dimensions that make especially Catholic school principals unique? And it's that, in that first line here, the principal fulfills the mission of the Catholic schools by serving as a spiritual educational and managerial leader of the school. It's not really that spiritual that sets the Catholic schools apart. The rest, well, charged with implementing the philosophy, mission, and objectives. Well, actually, philosophy and mission, again, are different for a Catholic school principal than a public school principal for the most part. But the overall management of the school, professional effectiveness of the staff, educational progress of the students, and the relationship with the entire school community is something you'd see in a regular job ad. But this job ad was, I use this job ad because it really, talked about essential job functions. And I won't read all of these, but, on this first list, there's 10 bullet points on what this particular school district was looking for in their Catholic school principal. starting with, upholding the philosophy of Catholic education and the mission of the school, a witness to the Gospels. So there's a lot of different things there, but it didn't stop. There was another whole page of essential job functions. Uh, and now you start seeing there's a lot. If you're a principal, any principal, you've got a lot to do. And there's even more things you do if you're a Catholic school principal. Um, I'm looking at this list again, like I haven't ever seen it before. You know, Promotes Catholic identity within the school. That's a big part of what a Catholic school principal is going to do. But other things like oversees are responsible for the annual school budget and supervises all expenditures. That's very common with a public school group. And you can just read down this list. Is this all that was in this job ad? No, there was even more. This principal was going to provide for an orderly school environment, promote self-discipline, develop faculty and student parent handbooks, complete and submit all official forms required by the diocesan Catholic school office. This was a Texas Catholic school. And then, hey, they're also going to, promote healthy staff morale and professionalism. This is quite a bit. Wait, there was even more in this ad. So, I was looking at this list and saying, okay, if this is the list of skills, the job analysis that was done by this particular school, it is fairly complete. Um, it was actually 3 pages long. I cut off some things. I kept this last little bit, required to work some nights and weekends, required to manage a high to moderate level of stress, uh, required to work a full school day. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody who's looking to become a principal that maybe you work some nights and weekends. And up at the top, the physical demands required to maintain composure and avoid inappropriate displays of emotion. Required to sit, stand, bend, stoop, reach, grab, pull, hear, see, and speak on a daily basis. Okay, there's a lot going on if you're a Catholic school principal or any school principal. And this ad was just 3 pages here. But that's not all. We're also, when we do our job analysis to identify what elements do we mean when we say support, what can we support? What are we going to direct our support to? There's also knowing that the principal is embedded in a web of relationships with key stakeholders. They're talking to the governing board, if there's a board, the clergy, bishop or pastor, staff, parents, students, other stakeholders, the community. So this principal has a set of skills that were outlined in the ad, but there's also a set of relationships that they have to master as well. That's quite a bit. And when you're thinking of support, there's almost too much to think about on where do we start? What skills, what relationships, what do we need to do to support this new principal that we have? And, again, you do the job analysis, you demonstrate they need to demonstrate specific skills and manage that network of relationships. How can we streamline all those things we just talked about into a usable tool that a school or a diocese looking to hire a new principal can use to help make the job manageable in ways that it, could benefit when it goes to thinking of where to support that new person. So first of all, we want to streamline that list and all those bubbles in some way. Then we want to identify for each task that we narrow things down to, kind of the proportion of time that the new principal dedicates to each of those tasks during a school year or a half a year or a semester. And then self-assess the competence the individual has on each of those tasks. And if we can do that, if we can streamline the list of tasks to something that's manageable but essential, identify the proportion of time directed to each task, and then get a rating of that individual on how well they do each of those tasks, we'll be able to build a profile that we can reflect on. We look at the time and the competence response data, and we can use that to prioritize how we're going to direct resources and support that principal. Usually, in the in other jobs, we look at the task that takes up the most work time and the task that has the lowest competency rating, and we try and target support to, hey, this is the thing they do the most that they have the least competence with. We'll get the most bang for our resource buck if we put our support resources in that direction. So the rest of this presentation is really, hey, can we streamline the tasks of a principal from all those bullet points, from all those academic studies into something that's manageable and that narrows the scope of what we're talking about into something we can use? And that's what this chart does. It really breaks down those job tasks into 12 categories. And the first three highlighted in green are really unique to the Catholic school principal. So let's talk a little bit about those job tasks here for a moment. The first thing, and this was in almost every job ad I looked at, articulate the vision and goals of the mission statement that you have for that diocese, for that school. You want to work with stakeholders and there has to be, that's pretty broad. The job tasks, sometimes they're a general description, and we have to turn those general descriptions into more concrete, observable behaviors in order to be able to think about how do we provide support for what, for a specific task or skill. So, articulating the vision means working with stakeholders to define the school targets and culture, and, living the mission. And some of these, in fact, there's the national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic schools, NSBECS. They have walked through the role of a principal in a way, the role of Catholic schools, um, and they have identified skill sets. And for instance, mission and Catholic identity, that job task number one, articulate the vision and goals of the mission statement. Work with stakeholders, define the school targets and culture. That is actually standard one, or it mirrors standard one of those effective Catholic school standards. And I thought it, and if someone wants to look at those, they're on I think you can get to them through the NCEA website, but you can also just type in national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic schools, and they will outline their mission, the 4 domains that make up important elements to think of work for Catholic education. And for each domain, there are particular standards. So for mission and Catholic identity, there's a number of standards. Standards 1 and 2 seem to align very well with the first 2 job tasks here. So it's not really recreating the wheel, it's just triangulating that this is not Dennis's idea of what the job tasks are, but they also mirror what come from academic studies and from Catholic organizations looking to define job tasks for effective Catholic schools. So we also have faith leadership and mission integration. Are they collaborating with clergy? Are they promoting religious education? Those are things we can see them do under that second job task. How about school growth? Number 3, school growth and stakeholder participation. Are they trying to grow the school? Can I see them do outreach to parents and community? What does that look like? But it's something you can see, you can measure, you can touch, and say yes, that's happening or not happening with this particular individual. Staff recruitment, retention, and management, huge job of the principal. Hiring, assigning, scheduling, and retaining staff. A lot of the work goes into that, and that's the domain of operational vitality in the effective school standards. That's a big part of a principal's job. Staff development, which is different from hiring, assigning, and scheduling. Now, once they're assigned and scheduled, you've got to observe, evaluate, coach, and manage their professional development. So all these skills, all these things, are they doing? Are they participating in the hiring process? Are they doing the scheduling? How is staff retention going? Are they observing on Job task 5, staff development. Are they observing their teachers? Do they use evaluations? Do they coach? Do they manage professional development? All these are concrete things that you can see happen if you're um, looking to profile a principal and decide where they need support. So you look across, and then when you look at the elements in green were really elements that are more unique to a Catholic school. The rest of the elements, even though they also have effective Catholic school domain references, work for any principal anywhere. Um, are they doing instructional leadership? What does that mean? It means, are they managing the selection, development, and implementation of curriculum? Data analysis is number 7. Are they doing any data analysis? Can they use the data from testing or from surveys of parent satisfaction or whatever data you have to identify areas for improvement and inform instruction? Student support, managing student activities, school discipline, budget management. There's a big one. Um, set and manage the budget, fundraise, and financial management. These are all critical tasks, again, that a principal does. So once we get this, so we've streamlined it to these 12 things: school operation, administrative leadership, budget management. Each one of these is a specific job task that you can see the elements in action and think about those as places or types of areas where you can give support. So the next thing, so we've streamlined the number of job tasks to a manageable set of 12. Once we do that, and this can be done before a principal is hired, it can be done by asking the principal who just left the position to fill out this survey, or it can be done by asking the new principal, hey, how much of your time do you spend on each of these tasks? Because we want to know where your efforts are going. If we're going to support you, and we have limited resources for support, hey, if you're only doing data analysis 1% of your time, maybe you should be doing it more, but say right now you're only doing it 1%. That's not we pour money into that, resources, time, and effort. Maybe we're not getting as big a return as if we taught you budget management, because that's taking 10% of your daily time. So but you ask the individual, whether it's the former principal, to say, hey, here's what I did before I left this job. This is how my week, month, year broke down across all these tasks. Or you can ask the new principal what they're spending their time on. You get a sense of how the job tasks are allocated across their workday. And this is just a sample. I asked one principal, I met with a number of principals, a former superintendent and a board member before I did this presentation, and showed them kind of the elements of the survey and asked them to think about it. And, got some general ideas. Like there's a lot of number 3, school growth and stakeholder participation. They tended to think that growing that school, outreaching to parents and community, that should be something that a new principal is really engaged in, a significant portion of their time. They thought the biggest thing was instructional leadership, managing the selection, development, and implementation of curriculum, along with the staff development. Together that staff development and instructional leadership was almost a quarter of their total time as a principal. But if you've got a school, and Jessica, do we have principals, or who do we have?
So it looks like you have a mix. You've got a few associate superintendents that are helping with mentoring new principals. We have a few incoming principals. So those that are assistant principals or starting their new position. And then a couple of consultants and current principals looking to grow their skill sets and kind of self-reflect or self-evaluate.
Well, one of the things that this form can be used for is really that it requires reflection to use well. To think about your time on task, and you set a certain time, like set an academic quarter. what did I do during the last quarter? How did I divide my time up? Think of the hours in a week, say 60 hours in a week. How many hours did I do each of these tasks during the week? And you start understanding where your time is going. And sometimes your job is going by so fast, you don't really have time to reflect or a structure for that reflection. Hopefully, by narrowing the scope of key job tasks down to these 12, and you can think about your time on task for each of these elements, you can identify, oh, this is really where I'm putting a lot of my time. That's important for me to know because if I need support, first of all, I'm not spending, for this sample here, I'm not spending any of my time on data analysis. That is really important to identify strengths. We have test scores I haven't been able to get to. Is there someone I can delegate that job to do so that we can, I don't might not have time to do it, but that's an important part of my job is to understand those data and to be able to think about those data. And I'm not just doing it right now. I need to spend more time in that. And it really requires that first step for reflection. Okay, so we identify the percent of the job time engaged in each task. By the way, the percent should total out to 100. Um, Sometimes we facilitate forums with teachers and they put down 100% on everything and they go, well, all these jobs are important. Right. That's a different question about the importance of the job. We're asking you how much time in your day you spend on each element. Okay, so we narrowed it down, we figured the time on task, and then we're going to do a self-assessment of competency across each task. And I say self-assessment, but it doesn't have to be a self-assessment. If you're hiring a new principal, or if you're a board members are reviewing a new principal's performance, you can kind of rate their competency instead of have that. You can both do it. They can rate their own competency on each of these dimensions. And it's just a simple scale of low, below average, average, above average, or high competency. And then you reflect on, okay, well, let's take a look at that. Here's a sample that I asked one principal to fill out. And they didn't fill it out for themselves. They filled it out for what they see in a lot of new hires. This was an experienced principal with 20 years of experience seeing principals come and go. And he thought that their diocese did a good job of hiring people who were in the green area and committed to the green area. The articulating the vision, the faith leadership, the mission integration, the school growth, stakeholder participation. A lot of times, when you think about, and one of the people I talked to spent some time talking to me about this, the people who become Catholic school principals a lot of times are not there for the money. They're there because they're living the mission. And they are people who oftentimes have concentrated on that mission and are good at that mission. They can model Catholic values. They can live as a role model. They can communicate outreach to schools and parents and community about the value of Catholic education. And a lot of the new principals that this particular group hired came in high on those skills. They also tended to be people who had classroom experience at some point. So they were very good at staff development or leadership instructional leadership. They understood the nature of a classroom. They understood the nature of instruction. They weren't so good at recruitment, retention, and management, hiring, assigning, scheduling, and retaining staff, because their background, a lot of times a principal is like a small business owner, right? They're running a business. It's a multi-million-dollar business. It's got 50, 100 people who are on staff or related to key elements. And as we saw in that job ad at the beginning, the principal's supposed to do everything at all times. Well, depending on your background and experience, or the new principal's background and experience, they might be high on some dimensions and low on others. And that's if they can reflect personally and say, you know what? This whole hiring, assigning, I've been a teacher, I've been an assistant principal, but I didn't really participate in the hiring, or I've been associated with the school in a number of ways, or Catholic schools in a number of ways, but I never was in the hiring process. Well, now you've got, hey, That's 10% of that person's time using this sample document. And it's not something they do really well, or they don't feel that they're competent on. They feel they're below average in their competency on it. Now you've identified an area where you can direct support. And there's a lot of ways. This presentation wasn't trying to drill down on each of these 12 dimensions. Here are the 12 or the 10 different things to provide support for each dimension. That's a little too micromanagement. What we want to see in this tool is to understand the time on task and the levels of competency associated with the streamlined set of skills as a way to identify, hey, 10% of my time spent hiring, assigning, scheduling, and trying to retain staff, and I don't think I'm really competent at that. I need help. And then you approach the board or the clergy you work with and say, hey, what kind of HR training can I get here? Or here's a course I can take. Here's an online course I can take. It's a couple hours. Can is this okay if I devote some of my school day or, you know, um, budget resources to taking this particular online class related to effective hiring and scheduling of teachers? And a lot of times that's because you did this in a thoughtful way. You were thoughtful about what you're doing and you were thoughtful about your skill set. You can identify that confluence of here's something I'm not really doing the way I want to do, and it's actually a really significant amount of what I do, and that's how you direct support. Now, I did have one individual tell me that um, school operations was something that most people come in with very little experience in. And that, and I talked to him about, hey, well, what do you mean by that? Well, the roof leaks in the gym. The boiler needs to be cleaned. The parking lot needs to be resealed. This isn't what I became a Catholic school principal to talk about. But all of a sudden, it's eating up a lot of my job, just being a school operations manager. There's a custodian, but they're not resealing the parking lot. They're not retarring the roof. So this is something I have to learn about. Um, and there are ways to learn about it. First of all, even just putting a book together of common vendors or the vendors that you have used in the past and making that available to a new principal can go a long way instead of who do we use the roof? And everybody in the office says, well, I think we use this company or we use that company. Just, you can support a new principal by putting resources together that help them identify where to go for school operations when there's a repair needed, or scheduling maintenance. Who did the survey of the school? How old is the roof? How, the sidewalks, are they, the playground equipment, all the things that you never thought, that wasn't your mission when you became a Catholic school principal. And they identified school operations as one of those areas where almost all the principals, new principals, really need support because there's a lot of time spent in that. Depending on the age of your school, there can be a significant amount of time spent on that. And it's something that there's very little training before you become a principal on actually accomplishing that. How do you even know if they've done the job well? You're not a construction expert. You're about the Catholic mission. You're about instruction. So again, that's the way this form works. And there's Jessica will attach a handout to this presentation that is this sample form. And I think in talking with, and I've just done this, reflect on the time and competency ratings to identify where resources should be directed to support the new principal. Just review that sample as an idea. It requires thoughtful reflection on time on task and level of competency. And if you don't feel that the new principal is able to identify, self-reflect and identify their levels of competency themselves, you can make it an organizational task. You can give it out to all the board members and ask them to fill out the survey about, for each of those 12 dimensions, to rate that principal on their competencies. It doesn't have to be self-directed. It can be done by others. Sometimes that input is also valuable because it all depends on the ability of the principal to spend time and reflect in a day that's really busy, right? Because they have the ability. It's whether they have the time, really, for the most part. So I know we might not have filled all our time. We're not going to do an hour, but this presentation identified an approach to targeting support for new principals based on the idea that the amount of time devoted to each major job task and the self or other rated competency levels displayed by that new principal on those tasks can give you an idea of where support needs to be directed. In general, tasks consuming more time and receiving below average competency ratings, that may indicate where support resources should be best directed to begin with. But that's something that reflection and customization are required here. No school, and I talked to a number of people, and it was a little different. Their perspective, their belief about principals' role and responsibilities, always a little different. So sometimes maybe like data analysis, you don't do it very much, but maybe you should have done it a lot more. And that's the kind of questions you reflect on and really have a conversation with the stakeholders in the group. And I could go back to the web of stakeholders, but talk to the clergy, talk to the governing board, talk to the parents, um, talk to the community in terms of businesses or organizations you're partnering with, and get as many inputs into that, especially the competency side of that, as you can as a way to uncover, hey, here's the combination of time and competency where we're going to do the best. And I'm going to end here. Hopefully that's valuable. I mean, if there are any questions, I mean, that's the model to use. Those are the 12 tasks. Those are the 2 questions you ask. You reflect on the answers and you come up with an idea of where support would be best needed. The actual support is something that you generate individually. But if you're bad at budgeting, maybe training on QuickBooks would be something that you could put the new principal through. Oh, I got all these other things to do. Yeah, but budgeting is 15% of your time. Staying on budget. Do you know your budget? Do you know where your dollars are? Hey, here's a software tool, whatever the district or diocese uses. Why don't we spend some time learning it and so you can learn how to run reports? Those kinds of next steps of what that support looks like is really up to bright people locally. Uh, so, but one thing I'd like to say is right now, we're seeking schools involved in the hiring of new principals or deciding what type of support a new principal may benefit from the most. Because I'd like to develop this form with a set of directions that can be a standalone product that can be used independently at the local level. Not looking to sell it. I'm really looking to build something that could be a tool to um, understand how best to implement that survey, build the directions around it, and then just make it available through NCEA to those who are involved in looking for new principals, supporting new principals, or a new principal looking for support. All it requires, if you send me a little email or a message, you probably just have one of our team members come out, probably me, work with the hiring or support team to model and facilitate the use of the support survey. We'll learn, you'll learn, we'll put the directions together, and then we'll package it up and have it go out through NCEA. So if you're interested in that, that's my pitch here at the end. Please contact me directly, Dennis Jarvinen, DennisJ@smeasurement.com. There's the office number. Do we have any questions?
We just had a couple of questions on the sharing of the recording of the video and on the table. So I let everybody know that we have the video recording and the table going out in a follow-up email after this webinar. You'll get that tomorrow. And then we did have a couple of little comments that principals are doing so much. We're seeing burnout due to unrealistic expectations. So this is a great tool for balancing time. And then the presentation was helpful, and I look forward to moving forward in a thoughtful and manageable way.
All right. I mean, when I saw that job ad that I used at the beginning, I said, I've got to use this because it's asking for Superman or Superwoman. Again, we expect so much from principals. Uh, and it's really hard if you listen to all those voices. There's so many things you're supposed. How do I narrow down what I'm supposed to be doing as a principal into a manageable chunk, and then think about those chunks in ways that can make me productive? And that, every once in a while, sure, there's a superstar who is a principal. And I one of my first projects when I started strategic measurement 20 years ago was working with Oakland Unified School District out in Oakland, California, and reviewing 49 what they called new small schools. They broke up their public schools into 49 smaller public schools, and each school had a principal and a charter. And we went out and interviewed all those principals at those 49 schools to understand what they thought their leadership role was, what they thought that was important for them to do. And a lot of them had very good um, answers, but it was hard for them to live it because they had so much to do. And that's the same from the Catholic. And there were a couple who didn't do many of the things on this list, but were like superstars. The kids, the parents, the teachers all loved them. And they did a couple things very well. And they just had that aura around them that people responded to. They were a real leader. But it's really hard to find, in that normal distribution of personality traits, those excellent principal leaders are a very small piece of a tail. A lot of times you get highly competent individuals, and additional training and time invested in those people can move them closer to that superstar tail. And that's kind of what the self-reflection, the competency ratings, and then accessing resources where they're needed the most comes in. So that's my presentation for today.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And thank you for all of those attending to NCA's webinar today. We are constantly striving to improve the quality of our service for membership based on feedback. We will use your input to inform future work and improve services. So if you could please complete the survey I am dropping in the chat, that would be much appreciated. And if you are interested in a certificate of attendance when you complete the survey, please include your email address and name at the end of the survey, and it will be sent automatically to your email. If you don't see it, please check your spam. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great day. And Dennis, thank you
One
so
last thing,
much.
please fill out the survey because I enjoy reading the comments. Even when they say, could he talk slower? Could he have a deeper voice or whatever it happens to be, you know.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and happy Easter.
Thank you.